Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. Early on Saturday morning, October 26, dozens of military and industrial targets throughout Iran have been hit by a meticulously planned and precisely executed Israel Air Force counteroffensive in retaliation for an Iranian missile barrage some 4 weeks ago. Israeli officials expressed satisfaction at both the tactical success of the mission and the strategic impact. The initial reaction out of Tehran indicated that the Islamic regime will not rush to strike back and unleash an even more significant Israeli reprisal. So, what is the current Israeli defensive and offensive posture vis-a-vis Iran, as surely this has not been the last round in the fight? To explore it, we're joined here in the studio by Brigadier General in Reserve Dr. Amnon Sofrin, formerly the Chief of Intelligence of Mossad, as well as a senior officer at the IDF Intelligence Directorate. Welcome, General.
Morning.
Good morning. Also joining us is Dr. Arad, formerly the Director of the National Security Council, as well as the Mossad Division Chief, among others, also the Chief of Intelligence, of course, of Mossad. It's a pleasure to have you.
Good to be here.
It's always a pleasure indeed. And with us here, of course, our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, a dramatic event with strategic consequences. What can you tell us about it? Set the stage for us.
Your introduction has focused on the bilateral relationship between Israel and Iran. But truth to be told, it's a trilateral relationship because the United States is the major factor here in the considerations of the two combatants. Israel had to restrict its strike according to what President Biden asked Prime Minister Netanyahu not to do, not to strike the nuclear infrastructure or the oil industry for fear of wider implications and consequences, not only for Israel, but for the American allies and partners in the Arabian Gulf, and for American troops and civilians in the region. And Iran, of course, has to consider the impact of of a regional conflagration on the November 5th elections in the United States, in which it seemingly wishes Kamala Harris to prevail over Donald Trump. So this has restricted both the Israeli military plan, which, as you said, has been meticulously thought out and then very, very professionally executed, and the considerations underpinning the Iranian decision on whether to retaliate at all or belittle what they have absorbed, because the Iranian public does not know the full extent of what happened, and if retaliate, in what fashion.
General Sofrin, Iran on the one hand is between a rock, being naked, stripped of its aerial defense array, and a hard place in which its cultural diktats, on a regional scale, including its proxies, are looking for certain reprisal, which of course the rhetoric now increasingly coming out of Tehran indicates some type of response. We have to wait and see what it actually means in practical terms. Nevertheless, it will establish a certain sequence, strategic sequence for that matter, rather than a one-stop strike, which is not the case.
We have to point some issues. The first one is there is a debate in Iran between what we call the hardliners, namely the Revolutionary Guards, who support an active response to what Israel has caused, the damage that Israel has caused by this attack. On the other hand, you have the president who is more moderate and is more focused on what we call the internal issues, especially on economics. And he said that if we are going to get into a larger war with Israel, meaning to exchange strikes on a daily basis or a monthly basis, so it doesn't really matter what, that will affect our economy and we are going to be badly damaged. That's first. Second, they know that they are exposed because the anti-aircraft batteries that Iran had, the long long-range ones, were demolished by Israel. And they know they're exposed, and Israel can hit any target it chooses and whenever it chooses. The third issue is, since they know that we know that the Iranians are very good chess players because they invented this game, and they have to consider that if we are now paying back on Israel, what Israel is going to do next? And that means we have to replan all over the chest, all over the board. That means you can't settle only with, okay, I'm going to retaliate, and let's see what happens next. You have to anticipate that. Now, and I know that the Iranians are learning very good what happens in the Middle East. And I'll take an example. We bombarded when Nasrallah was in the underground shelter in the depths of 50 meters. And we succeeded killing him and others as well. Now, the Iranians are aware of this fact, and they know that Israel has now the capabilities to penetrate the underground facilities, if needed. And we send them a message. We can do that, and we can choose the date and the way to do that. Now, please don't push your luck. That's the message. Now, the Iranians have to reconsider very well, and I believe that, first of all, they now explore the alternatives, and they consider it. And yesterday, Khamenei, the leader, said that let's say the senior leadership will decide what kind of reprisal we are going to have that will suit the interests of the country. That means we are not going to go all over to a larger war with Israel, but we're going to have some small-scale activity to show the world that we are not giving up, and especially to our people and to our proxies, but we are not going to retaliate to a full-scale war.
Indeed. Just for the sake of our viewers, I know there's been a lot of chatter about what type of surface-to-air defenses existed in Iran prior to this attack. So with regard, specifically to the air defenses, the longer-range air defenses were the Russian S-300M,
Right.
and of course the radars were the Russian most sophisticated type that are also integrated usually with the S-400 systems. All of that has been destroyed. So that is very,
Not
very...
all of them, most of them.
Well, in
Most
the
of them.
relevant strategic locations, which
Let's say that from Iran to the west side of the Iran and to the Iraqi border, whatever was due to be deployed there was the
But Jonathan, remember that when North Korea built a nuclear reactor in Syria, it was on purpose not defended,
Right.
because when you have
Right.
surface-to-air missiles, it discloses
It
that this
indicates,
is
it indicates, right.
sensitive. So maybe the Iranians still have some undisclosed sites which have not been defended, and the Western intelligence agencies and the Israeli ones are keeping an eye on.
Indeed. Dr. Arad, on the strategic level, what are the implications of the current strike?
Well, there are many implications because all kind of things became exposed, and in a way we had an acceleration of things that one thought would happen over time. Now they were accelerated by this flare-up in the Middle East, which forced all kind of steps, and certain capabilities were exposed and so forth. And it accelerated this in the following sense. Yes, the Iranians actually, when they attacked us initially with those ballistic missiles, twice in fact, first time with multiple types, and then they did not realize, I think, that what would ensue was this kind of surgical, but much more capable offensively than it happened. And now they realize that their decision to frontally attack Israel overtly was a major mistake for them. They had to rely on their standard strategy of doing this harm through proxies, while protecting any kind of attack on their soil, which could have come only if Israel were to do a kind of a preventive attack on the nuclear facilities. That they wanted to prevent. That they thought they were preventing by having this deterrent effect coming from the Hezbollah capabilities and others, and all the rest of their proxies all over the Middle East. And now they were disabused by both things, by this kind of mistake. First, the Hezbollah ability to rain destruction on Israel has been crippled, and it turned out that it cannot deliver the thing that it wanted. Neither did the other proxies. Secondly, Israel's ability to penetrate and to affect and to hit targets without any losses, and to do so in such a neat way, for example, without having many casualties, civilians. It was a kind of a sanitized operation. In so many ways, was remarkable. And now they feel much more vulnerable. They don't know what to choose. As you said, they have a dilemma to do. But be it as it may, I think that now Israel's deterrence has been much amplified, and built on that, this could be followed by an even greater ability to neutralize the threats that were coming with us, some with the Iranian complicity, such as the Hamas, but certainly the Hezbollah. So in this game, which became a kind of a tit for tat and a action-reaction thing in almost like in a theatrical way, Israel has won. And the Iranians have to re-examine their premises, and that is the stage we're in.
Absolutely. It's fascinating to see this from a strategic perspective. Dr. Sofrin, of course, mentioned chess being invented in Iran. Of course, India claims that it is invented in India. Nevertheless, each one will have its own merit into this school of thought. But when we look into the broad picture of things, Israel has put the Iranians on mate, and on a strategic sequence course of potentially checkmate if the Iranians fall into the prey in a ongoing sequence of tit for tat, so to speak. With the escalation dominance, however, in a position where Israel would not want to drag it on, we are expected to see an amplification, a rapid rise in the level of attacks on strategic infrastructure, be it nuclear, be it communications, be it energy. There are plenty of targets that would cripple then the Ayatollah regime. Now, Mr. Oren, when we're looking at the infrastructure in Iran, a couple of years ago, the Chinese have invested $400 billion for the course of 25 years in all of that vital energy and telecommunications infrastructure.
They committed. They did not yet invest.
Well, much of the revenues that have been coming in for the illicit oil production and sale to the Chinese, roughly 90%, was made in exchange, of course, for infrastructure proper. So to what degree is that also placing the Iranians in a tough position versus Beijing?
So you mentioned chess, and of course in a championship tournament in chess, if you draw and you're the champion, you keep your title. Your rival has to win over you. Just a draw, a tie would not be enough. So the question is, who entered this tournament as the champion? Now, on October the 7th last year, Israel lost its equilibrium, but it has regained it over this year, and it has shown that when it has the initiative, and even though it was not a surprise, and it is not a surprise that it was not a surprise, because both sides decided not to try and put the other side on edge, because then they would have tried to preempt. So both sides telegraphed. You remember this term from the time telegraph was a mode of communication. Both sides telegraphed their movements well ahead, either directly, publicly, or through mediators, telling the other side, my blow is coming, don't worry, it won't be fatal. Nevertheless, even though it was not a surprise, Israel managed to get what it wanted and have no casualty. No pilot had to eject and, Allah forbid, be a prisoner of war at Evin prison in Iran. So the Iranians know that Israel is only restricted by its own decisions and Washington's.
Of course. Within that context, Dr. Sofrin, we're looking at the broad picture of collaboration between Israel and Central Command. We did see, on the one hand, dozen, if not more, of aircraft fuelers, tankers, coming to the Central Command AOR prior to this attack, which the Biden administration was prudent enough to leak into the open source intelligence to allow for some prior alert, as Mr. Oren mentioned, to avoid unnecessary miscalculation. Nevertheless, none was detected on Israel's capacity to still execute and surprise the Iranians on multiple levels, being able to target every intended target, basically. And within that context, the Americans also provided the JS rapid deployment and rescue team, something that is very significant, of course, alongside Israel's own 669 airborne units. All of this indicates that the Americans were very much involved in this strike. To what degree does this also allow Israel to maneuver for a future sequence alongside the Americans saying, okay, we did what you asked, now the next stage, we do need to target essential strategic infrastructure, and therefore you're also committed to playing a role in those various activities?
I think that Israel cannot force America, the US, to share or to be participating in any action. This was a limited one. It was cooperated, or what we call organized in together with the Americans. The Americans knew exactly what targets are we going to hit. They limited the Israeli Air Force to go only for what we call military strikes and not to touch infrastructures, or vital infrastructure, not the nuclear facilities, no the what we call oil and energy facilities. And it was very limited, very accurate, and very precise attack to deliver a message. First of all, we can. Second, we are going to limit your capabilities to launch much more missiles into Israel because we hit what we call the main facility of producing ballistic missiles. And there are debates whether or not did we hit what we call the factory or the main facility that products UAVs as well, kamikaze UAVs. But nevertheless, it was coordinated. The Americans took an active part. They knew exactly what we were doing. They participated in defending Israel from a possible immediate response coming on from Iran. And on the other hand, they took an active part with not attacking, but what supporting the attack, maybe by refueling, maybe by the unit that you mentioned before. That means that for the time being, we're organized, we're coordinated, everything is under control. If Israel decides on the next phase, dependent on what the Iranians are going to react, or how they are going to react, and if Israel decides to go and attack, for example, nuclear facilities, I'm not sure the Americans are going to be a part of that. They will object. They will try to avoid us from doing that. And to limit us one more time to what we call more military targets or quasi-military targets, and not to go to a larger extent.
Which brings me to the question to you, Dr. Arad. Since November 5th is just around the corner, there's going to be, of course, a transition period up until January 20th, where the Biden administration is still going to be in office. And while labeled as a lame duck administration usually, as was the case always in the past, it still has the capacity to push for various types of resolutions in the Security Council or other activities that can be utilized as a lever against Israeli activities, particularly in the region, including vis-a-vis the Islamic Republic of Iran. Nevertheless, I'd like to ask you about the other factor, the incoming administration of a potential Trump team or Harris team. Will Israel be subjected to a certain constraint vis-a-vis those new incoming administrations, which will have their own interests to start their own tenure within the halls of power of Washington in order to start in a better position than an all-out war between Israel and Iran?
Well, of course, I don't know how this will play out. It's very difficult to guess in advance. There is always a possibility, indeed, even a temptation, to benefit of this interval. And should the Iranians be silly enough to provide us with a pretext to go on the second strike, and in this time really hit hard. And that could be, and in terms of targeting here, I must go back to simplistic basics, in which the two big asymmetries that exist in this entire situation. One is that, and it is not just a rhetorical point, this Iranian regime declared its intention to see about Israel's destruction. It says so. It prepares for that possibility. It is taking action, and you cannot dismiss that, that it will try to bring it about. Their preferred strategy was to bring about an Israel collapse under pressure, and not by direct Iranian strike, certainly not a nuclear, even if they were to become nuclear, because even with the nuclear capacity, they would like to see the practice do the job, and Israel collapse from within under the burden of the many problems it would have. But that asymmetry that Iran does want and is pursuing activities to hurt Israel is evident. Israel by itself has no declared strategic objective to destroy Iran. At worst, you can say that it did declare a hope for a regime change there, so that make the current regime in Iran, possibly for self-preservation, would consider Israel as an enemy and a dangerous enemy. But Israel has never declared, on a state matter, a strategy of having to destroy Iran. And that is a clear asymmetry, because in that context, Iran is an aggressor in international legal terms. Israel is defending itself. The possibility of a preemptive strike comes to mind in a kind of anticipatory self-defense. So in legal terms, there is a clear division of who is in the wrong and who is practicing its right in this context. But then there is another asymmetry, and let's not be confused by the word infrastructures. Iran has a glaring vulnerability which is unique. Its entire economy is predicated on its energy, oil and gas and all the derivatives. In a way, and in a kind of a dramatic way, Israel is in a position to render this big nation, advanced nation, into a Mauritania. Just think of it, big desert, just by essentially destroying their energy capacities. Of course, what that may do to the world is a consideration. But when faced to the wall, short of that, and we could have targeted such targets now, if, for example, the Hezbollah were able to create havoc in Israel infrastructures, not necessarily energy, anything which is hit within Israel, the heartland of Israel, would affect us in terms of economics and so forth. And the equivalent would be to hit similarly, say, economic value. But in the case for Iran, it's a matter of life and death. So we refrain from doing that. But this is a kind of a pressure point and a deterrent that may be an effective one when you play below the threshold of the direct or indirect use of nuclear weapons. And that had been demonstrated now. So they are treading very, very carefully. And I think that the Israeli choice of targets has been very judicious, because not only we did not go after, although the Farchin thing evokes many, say, smiles, how convenient it was to have targets, legitimate targets in such vicinity. But you see, we bent over backwards. It was not, we didn't even hit military targets. We refrained from attacking harbors or large military facilities. We refrained from hitting governmental. So it was just, the modest thing, which was the ability to produce missiles, how restrained an attack it was. But in effect, strategically, it is much more, renders Iran much more vulnerable and must bring about second thoughts in Iran, not only about possibly restraining its own nuclear program, but also restraining its own proxies. And that's where it's maybe heading.
The Islamic Republic of Iran speaks often about Article 51 of the UN Charter, about the various judicial foundations or legal foundations for the capacity to enact aggression against other nations. Thankfully, they would not prosecute that within any international body, because they know full well that they will lose not only in the battlefield but also in the court of law, unless, of course, the court is rigged, but then we will have to deal with the system at large. Unfortunately, this is all the time that we have for today. I would like to immediately thank General Dr. Sofrin, Dr. Arad, and Mr. Oren for all of your insights. And I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition from here in Jerusalem. Shalom.